Okay, try to picture this for a second. Imagine a world where just 1 square mile of land in this city is worth more than the entire state of California. Now, this isn't science fiction. This was the reality in Japan in the late 1980s, which was, believe it or not, the scene of the single greatest financial mania in all of human history. This is the incredible story of when a nation's wealth became a weapon and then, eventually, a curse.
You know, it all starts with the small, totally absurd details. So, it's 1989. You could walk into a high-end department store in Tokyo and find melons, yeah, the fruit, selling for $2,000 a piece. And the craziest part, people weren't just looking, they were actually buying them, sometimes in bulk. That was the kind of everyday excess we're talking about.
And this mania wasn't just about fruit, it was in the very ground people walked on. To really wrap your head around the sheer scale of this, get this. At the peak, the land just underneath Tokyo's Imperial Palace was valued at more than all the real estate in the entire country of Canada. Its a valuation so ridiculous it honestly sounds like a hallucination.
And it wasn't just land. A single membership to a golf club, that could set you back $3 million. But here's the real kicker. People weren't buying these to play golf. Oh no, they were trading them like stocks as speculative assets, just betting that the price would go even higher tomorrow. It was wild.
I mean, this was a world of pure, unadulterated insanity. But behind all the neon lights, the gold leaf sushi, and the businessmen hailing taxis with $100 bills, a monster was growing. It was a bubble so massive that when it finally popped, it didn't just break an economy, it pretty much froze a global superpower in time for 3 decades.
So, the big question is, how on earth did this happen? How did an entire, brilliant nation completely lose its mind? Well, the answer, like with a lot of these financial bubbles, starts with a single decision that lit the fuse on a global economic explosion. It all goes back to 1985, to a meeting at the Plaza Hotel in New York. The world's biggest economies agreed to devalue the US dollar against the Japanese yen. Almost overnight, the yen doubled in value, making Japan incredibly rich on paper. But a super strong yen is terrible for exports, right? So to protect their economy, the Bank of Japan did something fateful. They slashed interest rates to practically zero. All of a sudden, money was basically free. This absolute flood of cheap money created this phenomenon called Zaitech, which basically means financial engineering. Huge corporations like Toyota and Sony quickly figured out they can make way more profit from speculating on stocks and land than they could from their actual businesses of building cars and electronics. I mean, why bother with manufacturing when you can just play the market?
If you want a perfect example of just how detached from reality things got, look no further than the story of Nui Onoue. She was a restaurant owner who claimed a giant ceramic toad statue told her which stocks to buy. And the biggest banks in the world, they listened and they loaned her billions. Think about that. This was the state of the market. The world's biggest banks were taking financial advice from a ceramic toad.
So by the late 80s, Japan felt completely invincible. They were just swimming in cash, totally convinced of their economic superiority, and they didn't just want to win. They wanted to own the symbols of Western capitalism. They went on a global shopping spree, buying up the world's trophies like they were collectibles.
Their ambition was just staggering. Mitsubishi bought Rockefeller Center. I mean, the ultimate symbol of American industry. Sony bought Columbia Pictures, a huge piece of Hollywood's soul. And Japanese investors even snapped up the legendary Pebble Beach golf links. It really felt like a global economic conquest.
And the engine behind all of this? The stock market. On December 29, 1989, the Nikkei 225 index hit its all-time high of 38,915. Now, to put that into perspective for you, the price-to-earnings ratio for the entire market was over 60. To any rational investor, that's not just expensive, it's a blaring siren of collective delusion.
And this whole thing was connected in a super dangerous, self-fueling cycle. It was an infinite loop. Banks would lend massive sums of money against the rising value of land. That money would get poured into stocks, pushing prices even higher. Those stock gains were then used to buy more land, causing land prices to soar even further. It was just a spiral of debt and asset inflation feeding on itself. And people absolutely believed it would last forever. As one banker from that era said, "We thought land prices in Japan would never, ever go down." See, it wasn't an economic forecast anymore. It had become an article of faith. It was a religious belief. And let me tell you, when markets become a religion, disaster is usually not far behind.
And then the party ended.
It ended on the very last business day of the 1980s. When the calendar flipped to 1990, the Bank of Japan, absolutely terrified of the inflation they had unleashed, finally raised interest rates. The music stopped, and that's when the great unraveling began. It wasn't a sudden crash, more like a slow, agonizing slide back to a reality that everyone had forgotten existed. The destruction of wealth was just catastrophic. Both stock and land prices didn't just dip, they totally collapsed. Within just a few short years, asset values had plummeted by as much as 80% from their peak. Trillions of dollars in phantom wealth just vanished into thin air.
But the true tragedy was what came next, the lost decade, which then stretched into 2 decades and then 3. Millions of ordinary people were trapped in what's called negative equity, working tirelessly to pay off mortgages on homes that were now worth less than their cars. An entire generation was just economically paralyzed.
So, why does this story from over 30 years ago even matter now? Well, because while bubbles always wear a different mask, whether it's tulips or dot-com stocks or real estate, they all share the exact same DNA. And the lessons from this wreckage are absolutely timeless.
So the first lesson is you have to beware the new era fallacy. That super dangerous idea that this time is different. The second is to never, ever confuse price with value. Back in 1989, Japan was all price and very little underlying value. And finally, you have to remember that debt is a double-edged sword. It creates miracles on the way up, but it causes funerals on the way down.
The legendary investor Seth Klarman put it perfectly. He said, "The stock market is the story of cycles and of the human behavior that is responsible for overreactions in both directions." The Japanese bubble wasn't so much a failure of economics as it was a failure of human psychology, of greed turning into fear on a massive national scale.
And if you need one final jaw-dropping number to really grasp the true cost of this mania, here it is. It took Japan's stock market 34 years, all the way until 2024, just to get back to its 1989 peak. Think about that. An entire generation of investors spent their whole lives just waiting to get back to zero. Which brings us to the final and most crucial question. This whole story of greed, ceramic toads, and forgotten history is a really powerful warning. So as you look at the markets today, with soaring asset prices and all the talk of a new era, you really have to ask yourself, are we seeing these same red flags all over again?